I don't know, man. America is just frustrating me today.
America is frustrating you today?
Not just America, people.
Like Ward Crocker for not showing up? Well, I know that's not true, but I just like...
I'm actually frustrated with Ward Crocker for not showing up, man. He's been dissing us all year.
I don't know why the whole summer off.
I don't know why we let him on this radio program. I'm going to vote. I want to vote him off the island.
Uh-oh. Yeah. See, he's got family stuff. But that's okay. We don't care about
no Ward, man. Don't be talking about we love Ward Crocker. We don't.
All right. Well, hey, before you get anything serious about why you are frustrated with America.
Oh, I'm good. I'm good with that.
I think this is the funniest thing. Elections here. This is my funniest story from the election. This is
not about witches in Hollywood. Come on, man.
No, nobody cares about that. Never have. No.
Everybody asks me about it.
35 episodes we've done so far. Number this being 35.
Everybody asks me about it. Everybody asks me about it.
Nobody cares about witches in Hollywood. This is funny though. So here you go. Everybody's worried about underrepresented groups, and I saw the things. The first Muslim person, women in Congress, first Muslim minister, first Muslim women,
the first Indian,
which was offensive to Elizabeth Warren. I mean, that was the heck?
She's 1,124th.
What?
Oh my God!
Did they just say she didn't count? That was rude.
She didn't count.
I saw CNN tweet that out, and I almost replied, "You are racist, sir. You are not counting Elizabeth Warren."
That is absolutely funny.
Anyway, but one of the most underrepresented groups I think we have that never gets any press are the dead. We talk about the dead in every election voting, but how many dead people are actually representing us in the Congress or in our elected government? Well, this dead pimp that won in Nevada in the election, now it's not to the federal level, but still, it's a step forward for this underrepresented dead group that have no representatives. So you heard about that, right? Though?
I did not.
So the guy named Dennis Hoff, he was running, and apparently it's the fault of evangelicals for supporting him. Although, ironically, I think it's evangelicals for decades of saying prostitution should not be legal, but it's legal here. And so now it's their fault that he got elected. Apparently, I don't know. I'm not sure I can figure all of that out. All I know is he died like about a month ago.
Dennis Hoff did.
Yeah. And he was actually after one of his election rallies, he was at a party. He was partying pretty hard. And he died after partying all night. And he owned a brothel. So he's a pimp, it's a strip club.
Oh, is this
brothel.
the guy? Yeah.
Yeah. So he was 72, and he defeated the Democratic candidate. And so he won election, even though he's been dead for some time.
Oh, my gosh.
And so I think that this is an important day in America, because this underrepresented group in our elected office is now clearly, it's like the glass ceiling. It was broken.
Oh.
This guy broke through the glass ceiling. Now we're going to see more dead people.
So who gets to name his seat? Is it the governor?
Okay, well, if you want to be serious about it, yeah. So what happens is apparently there was some sort of understanding that, like, because he was elected, a person of that same party will be appointed. So people supported him even though they knew he was dead.
Oh, yeah, that's actually good. That's actually very good.
But it's not funnier to think that the dead are now represented.
But I think that's strategic. I won't say who I voted for yesterday, but I voted for someone who in 999.9999 million years,
Dianne Feinstein,
I would never vote for her. But in this case, I voted for that person because the person that person was running against would have been 10 times worse for the next 20 years.
I would have never thought about voting for Feinstein. But I was talking, actually, it's my mother-in-law. We were doing all our voting, so sitting down and talking about this stuff. She's like, oh, no, vote for her. I'm like, why would I vote for her? And she's like, oh, yeah, there's apparently this strategy. Like, because she's older, and she's actually less progressive liberal than the other guy.
And the other guys are straight-up socialists.
Yeah, the guy is straight-up socialist. So the idea was vote her in because she's short-term, it's less damage than the long-term if you vote the younger guy in who will probably never get out. So at least maybe next time you get lucky and have two decent people to vote between. Or
we'll have a party. We'll get rid of this jungle primary thing here in California, which is just the dumbest thing in the world.
So anyway, so that was interesting. And I guess apparently the same goes for Duncan Hunter, because I was not necessarily going to vote for him. He's a Republican here in California for the House of Representatives, or Senate.
House.
And so I was like, he's not necessarily a good dude from what I understand, and he's under indictment for stuff that I probably most likely he's going to go to jail for, if not get out of office for. But apparently that's why a lot of Republicans still voted for him anyway, because if he gets ousted once in office, then there's a commitment to replace him with the same party or something. I don't know where that comes from, but that's apparently the same kind of thing. But
I don't know.
Anyway, I just think it's
an interesting thing.
I just think it's nice that dead people are now fairly represented.
Is that him on the cover?
Yeah, that's him with this.
Is he like dead?
Not on the cover, no. He's still alive in that picture.
Oh, well.
That's with one of his
friends,
his employees.
Yes.
Lawfully employed employees.
So
that was my
before we get started, tell me what was your take on last night's election?
I didn't pay attention to most any of it until this morning. Like I didn't
really care.
No, because it's all just guessing up until the end. So it's like I'm tired.
Like Scott
the polls
Walker.
Are wrong. The polls are wrong about everything all the time.
Scott Walker's gone.
Oh, is he?
Scott Walker.
He didn't win for the governorship again?
He was winning when I went to bed, and then I woke up and he had lost.
He's one of a lot of other Republicans won close ones, I guess, or for governors, or increased their governorships, I guess. I don't know. But I don't listen. I don't pay attention to most of it because, look, I mean, the polls say what they're going to say. They've been wrong the last bazillion election cycles, and that's a precise number, bazillion, at least as precise as the polls are. And so it's like people get exercised and upset and worried about this and this. Oh, this results in, it's 30% in. Who's it going to be? It's like, look, wake me up in the morning. Nothing I do watching is going to change the result, right? I mean, I can't change it. It's already done. So what am I going to do?
Well,
so I just wait till
I will tell you.
Whining is over.
Well, let me tell you. I will tell you. When Trump won in 2016, I didn't vote for him, and I remember leaving here. We had a class that night. I remember leaving here at 9:00 and getting home by like 10:30 and 11. And finding out when I left, he was like a 68% chance. Hillary had a 68% chance of winning. Within an hour, I mean, driving home, he was like a 60. No, he was like 68% chance of winning. So I mean, it like switched 100%. And then I will tell you, listen, to watch on election night.
Now I watched that election night.
The news media on this absolute freak out was one of the most amazing, beautiful, funny.
It was entertaining.
Events in my I kept flipping all night. I was flipping stations just to drink in the anger.
Video thing that it said it was on CNN, but this guy was dropping F-bombs like crazy. Like, I can't believe this happened, and he was like,
listen,
that have been on live? Was that really live? I was like watching this.
Let me tell you.
They put that on live.
If you watch the news these days on some of these channels, they're saying stuff that we've never heard on television before. I mean,
I don't watch TV news much anymore. So.
Well, I'm talking about cable news. I mean, it's just fascinating. They see stuff that I never heard on television before.
I just don't watch TV news at all.
Did you see the CNN reporter today not want to give up the microphone?
Oh, I did. I watched. You told me to watch it, so I looked at the YouTube of Trump's presser.
The guy.
Only about like. Okay, honestly, that whole thing, I mean, it was a little contentious here now. The thing with Acosta only lasted like a couple minutes.
But it's still
like the hour and a half he was interviewing.
But still, that's still amazing, though, that this guy was fighting them for the microphone.
It was like, I didn't see the camera showing
they show the camera, and she's trying to get the microphone from him, and he's not giving the microphone.
I got to see that camera angle. I just saw
that is insane.
Square on him. He's like, somebody else. No, it's her. It's her. He's like, he's over there fighting her for it.
It's insane.
Yeah, I think any sense of decorum is gone and all that stuff. Yeah. And I get, Trump's a brash. He's got his side, but the press has there's plenty of blame to go around for a lot of people for a lot of stuff. And blaming one person isn't going to solve it, but there's a lot of folks that have equal share in the thing. Because I saw that presser and they're like, are you going to tone down your rhetoric? As they sit there and say things that are not toned down and that are attacking, it's like, and Trump kind of made this point, like, well, here I came with a good spirit, so you guys keep, standing up and yelling at me and doing all this stuff.
Oh, yelling from the stands, like they're and this is not. These are not pundits. These are not.
These are supposed to be the straight news.
These are not opinion makers. These are the straight news people. These are the people who are writing stories that are supposed to be reporting facts to us. And really what we see when we get a chance to peel the curtain back is they're all opinion makers.
They're all.
And they're
that's
they're
the
not
thing
straight
about
news.
That's why news is dead people. For the most part.
Yeah.
There's no straight news people, conservative or liberal.
No, that goes on both sides. That goes on both sides. I mean,
most news anywhere.
That goes on both sides.
There's a couple people on a couple channels that I've seen clips of, because like I said, I don't really watch TV news because of that anymore. But I've seen some clips of some people that seem like they've given some fair stuff. But that's why, I seriously, about a year and a half ago, just stopped watching.
Bailed.
I read Twitter, and I have a feed that I created, like a group list with all the main news sources. But I include a lot of, both conservative and liberal news sources in it. And I'll read the headlines, and if it looks like a decent story, I'll check it out. And so I do it mostly through print media.
Do you read Drudge?
Digital. I have Drudge on the list, so I'll pull them up. I pull up Breitbart's in there.
I read Breitbart.
I do everything across the spectrum. I
read Fox.
I have Fox. I have CNN.
I skim CNN. I skim MSNBC.
I don't even. I'll tell you what. The ones I don't do MSNBC because that's a waste. And but I'll have New York Times and Washington Post.
You have to have them in Washington Post.
WAPO, those kind of things.
What about the Washington Examiner?
I don't think I have them. I should.
You should. The guy worth listening to on that paper is Byron York, and he's a straight news guy.
Yeah, but I have like National Review of the Conservative. So I have a whole list. I have 33 news outlets that I have in this list, and I just get the recent headlines, and I do it that way. But at least I can read, and seeing the bias is a lot easier. It's a lot easier to take, but it's a lot easier to figure out in print than when you're watching it because the amount of emotional manipulation that takes place on the video portion. And so I honestly recommend to people is like just cut off all the news people. They're all a waste. You can still read what they're saying, but it's hard. You can't get it. It's harder to be subjected to the emotional manipulation. They can try in the print, but it's easier, I think, to figure out in print.
It's so funny you say that. I had somebody on, I think, the Schaefer Facebook page.
Francis Schaefer.
There's a Francis Schaefer Facebook page. It's really
good.
See,
a dead guy who's now represented because he's.
But it's a really good page. It's run by one of his disciples, and this guy's name is Donald Williams, who writes extensively everywhere. But somebody put Marshall McLuhan's famous speech, "The medium is the message," on there, and I watched it, and I had read it, and didn't really think much of it. But boy, I started to really think about the medium, and you're talking about television.
Yeah.
And in listening to him talk about how television manipulates the mind, and what it does is it distorts time. It gives you a false perception of time, and the pageantry gives you a false perception of reality, and how both together distort the message that they hope to deliver. And then I started to think of that with Facebook. And how on Facebook it distorts the message too. The medium, not the people, but the medium itself, coaxes you to tell things about yourself over a long period of time that you wouldn't share, or that you don't even know that you're sharing,
and how who you're sharing with,
and how it helps people aggregate a set of ideas about who you really are, which you don't really see yourself displaying over a long period of time.
Yeah, because it can get a false, because you're just posting. It's like when people complain about restaurants, they don't post positive reviews generally, they post negative reviews. Somebody compiled all the things you posted online about every restaurant you ever ate and say, this guy hates restaurants. He's never said anything nice.
Sure.
Well, no, I said he's just, what we tend to post isn't real life. Just like we post, like when it was before the political days of Facebook, it was all, everyone had a perfect meal and a perfect family. Here I am on vacation, all smiles, all great food, all this stuff. That person's never had a bad meal, if you only based it on what they posted.
Sure.
So there was that effect where people argued that there was depression. People were getting depressed on Facebook because it seemed like everybody else had these perfect lives.
Right.
And so the same thing applies to politics.
And the reality is, it isn't.
It distorts the reality of what it is.
But on Facebook, the politics on Facebook, and I hope I'm not derailing. If you have something...
No, nothing. It's off the cuff.
The politics on Facebook is, like you said, are always things that people are generally negative against. And it creates this false atmosphere that people are angry about politics. No, people are generally angry about one or two things, maybe a few things. unless you're, an activist that is just an absolute, nut bar.
Yeah, and that's why I think unplugging from a lot of the TV media. I mean, I'll listen to when I drive a little bit of talk radio, and that's where I'll hear kind of what's happening. So maybe 30 minutes a day is all I get because to and from work, total like 30 minutes a day. If I'm driving around somewhere else on the off day, I'll get a little bit more time. But that's about it for those media. The rest is just some print that I just scan through on those, a breadth of it. But I think it's a lot less, and this I recommend for everybody, is unplug from being absorbed in those things. Mm-hmm. Don't absorb yourself because, like you said, it leads to, I think, a lot of the anger that is out there is because we're told we're supposed to be angry about this, everything. We have to virtue signal and say, "Oh, I'm angry at this because I have to be angry at this." And this group voted like the Duncan Hunter stuff. It's easy. Like I could point out the same thing on what is his Joe Mendez.
From New Jersey, Bob Menendez.
Yeah, Bob Menendez, who was reelected, and he's a corrupt guy, indicted, but he hung jury on a couple charges.
Whatever. And one of his jurors was at his inauguration. It's deal last night.
Yeah, so I look at Hunter and Menendez in a similar vein. It's like, okay, I voted for Hunter not because I think he's a bad dude, but at least he'll get he'll probably get indicted. At least he'll get replaced with somebody. Hopefully, it's a decent human being. But the two choices on the ticket, they were both terrible choices.
Right.
I picked the one that's probably going to be at least replaced. Hopefully, I get a better person.
At least terrible.
But so from the outside, they're like, oh, Republicans in whatever margin endorse Duncan Hunter. They endorse his evil. I mean, that's how it's spun on the media when they talk about it. Republicans don't care. They're corrupt. And I think we do that the same to those on the other side. We look at anybody that voted for Menendez, and we assume that they don't care about all the stuff.
They don't have good reasons.
But maybe they had reasons for voting for him, just like other Republicans had reason to vote for Menendez or for Hunter, that may not make them the evil person we make them out to be, or the other thing. So, I think a lot of what our politics is predicated on, because of what the media does, is that we have to make enemies out of everybody and everything. Mm-hmm. Anybody who decided anything must be an idiot, must be, inhuman, must not care. When in reality, I think a lot of people do it for a lot of different reasons. And we would take the time to make those observations about the people in our life, except the people not in our life, the media, on Facebook, that we just develop this narrative in our head that like anybody who did this must be evil. So then I know somebody in my life who does that, and I just assume that they're evil instead of taking the time to talk to them, get to know them, understand what's going on in them. So it's just alienated the deformity of what you said, like what the deformed perspective we get online has harmed the way we relate with people in person. And so I think, honestly, just learning to unplug from all that craziness, and we can still disagree. That's great. Fine. Disagree and argue, whatever. But trying to turn everybody into evil human beings
is bad. It reminds me of the conversations that went around when Nixon debated Kennedy and the first time, and how everybody who watched television thought Kennedy won. Everybody who listened to it on the radio thought Nixon won. Yeah. I think that's a good example of the medium being the message, how the medium distorts opinions. Yeah. Because Kennedy looked young and energetic, passionate when he spoke, whereas Nixon, with his 5 o'clock shadow, looked more sinister, less trustworthy when he spoke.
Yeah. He was not as telegenic as
Kennedy was. And people who got a chance to see that, they were...
Yeah, why do you think all our politicians are like these beautiful people?
Exactly.
Because they all look good on camera. Well, you know what I'm saying. Except for the ones that have already achieved power, then it doesn't matter.
They're all telegenic. I was also going to say, the one thing about Facebook I think happens is it distills a set of ideas, because it's not, you're not giving people a full accurate picture of yourself. You're giving them a window into who you are. But what it does is it distills a lot of your statements in one small place. You're not getting a three-dimensional picture of the individual.
So I tell you to stop posting crazy stuff on Facebook.
I don't post
more
stuff.
Questions. Ask, at least trying to ask people questions. Like that's what I've tried to do. And occasionally I can get some decent stuff. I've done it actually Now, I've done it the last couple of months. I've posted, I just have questions survey. I don't want to, I press it. Don't want any arguments. I'm not going to argue with you. Why do you think X, Y, Z?
See,
I've actually had some decent exchanges.
I think that's a fair approach.
And then I write an article about it or a blog post about it with a thoughtful interaction based on what people have actually said, not my perception of what I think they said or whatever, because that gives you something to go.
My view is a little bit more rough and tumble.
I know that.
It is a little bit more rough and tumble.
Anybody who's friends with Leroy Hill.
And there's a reason for that.
Your wife's not a friend with you on Facebook.
She is actually.
Oh, she friended you finally?
She's always friended me. She just doesn't follow me.
She unfollowed you.
And
that's funny.
And there's a reason why. I tend to say what I think. I've been around people who don't want me to say what I think.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I've been around a lot of people who don't want me to say what I think or just to be quiet. And I've just pretty much had enough of that.
How much of that, well, let me ask you this question then. This is actually open up, because I actually don't know your answer to this. Because, I mean, I know that you've said, there's people like that before. That's not me. But I don't know the answer to this question. How much of that do you think is people who want you to, be quiet and do this? How much of that is a racially motivated be quiet, Leroy?
I don't think it's at all racially motivated, to be honest with you. I think we've talked about power dynamics.
Yeah.
Right? I think that in a lot of relationships that I've had with people, I've been fortunate to be around people who are responsible for a lot of important stuff. And those people don't want to be shown up in any way by someone who may think a little bit deeper about a topic.
No, I've had plenty of that.
Than they want to. And people will deny that.
Especially lots of pastors.
Yeah. People will deny that. They don't want you to say anything that in any way shows that they haven't really thought that deeply about some of these issues. And I don't think that's a race issue. I just think there's more power. There's more of a power dynamic.
What about, because one of the things I was thinking of when you were saying that, maybe this is not what you intended by that. Because I know you've had discussions with friends you grew up with, and they kind of have some nice racial terms for you because you don't take the position. This is a great question. That's what I was thinking. How much of the people, hey Leroy, sit down and be quiet, were kind of because you're not giving
let me say
the line you're supposed to give as a black man.
Yeah, let me say that is not just merely a friend thing. I think that's a cultural deal. I have a cousin, love to death. Talk to my cousin 4 or 5 times, maybe 6, 7, 8 times a week. It's my cousin I grew up with. He's like my brother growing up. And I love talking to him because, we're radically different. But we grew up together and we know each other and we have the same, life experiences growing up. Although we're different, we have radically different views. And he was asking me this question. I was asking him, why he voted the way he does. I love listening to him talk about voting because I think that he gives me a real perspective on how people, who live in a neighborhood that they think about these issues. And he's been right. When he's in tone what people think, I think he's been right about it. So I like to hear him.
What kind of neighborhood does he live in?
He lives in Southwest Philadelphia.
Okay.
Lives in Southwest Philadelphia.
Back where you guys
Back where we grew up at. Okay. And when he's talked about some issues, particularly in terms of race, he's been 100% dead on. Now, I said to him, you and I have talked like this, like we talk 8 times a week for the last 8, 9 years, right? And I said, that I am for black people. I said, that innately. You know that I don't hide anything about what I think to you about these issues. I said, but when we get down to this, to issues like this, and I tell you, and you know where I'm coming from, why I think the way that I do, why do you think that I shouldn't be thinking this way on these issues?
Yeah. That your thought is against black people.
It's against black people.
Because
and I asked him this just the other day. I think it's the first time we've had that discussion just the other day. And he couldn't give me an answer. Because he would admit, in the conversations we've had all kinds of, yelling conversations. We have conversations that people who love each other have, who are not afraid to hurt each other's feelings have. And most of the people I chat with, I have that kind of relationship with. I think what is going on with my friends, and I think what is going on with, even very smart people, is they don't have answers to what ails black people or what ails our culture. We all love black people. We do. I mean, we love, being black, so to speak. We love that. I mean, you grow up that way. You've seen how the country has changed. You've seen how black people change in the country. You want to see black people do well. But when it comes to solving the issues, I think some people, it's an age-old argument. Do we coddle and not make the pain so severe that it needs to come when you change? You have people who say, make the pain severe now. And you have people who don't want that pain. That pain comes from looking at us and asking, why is our culture the way that it is? I'm not talking about the great parts of it. I'm talking about those bad parts of it that we all know that need to change. Why won't we say what's true about those issues? When I was growing up as a kid, I can tell you this, honest to goodness. Before I went out and got my first job, my dad, my mom, and my friends, adults would always say, now, when you go down there and you get hired over there, you do not make it worse for someone to come, for them to want to hire someone else to come and work there. So when you go to that job, you go and you
felt you were representing, what they're saying is you're representing the next black guy, black gal.
That's exactly. You're making a way for them. You're making an opportunity for them to come and get a job.
Because they knew it was tough.
Because they knew it was absolutely tough. Yeah. You don't hear that kind of talk at all among black people anymore. At least around the black people I'm around. They don't talk like that anymore.
About making a way of
representing like, no, the next generation. No, and part of it is because part of it is a good thing. Part of it is, this growth, and mindset that there's more freedom, and you don't really have to have that mindset, like you used to have in the past. So that's part of it's a good thing. But the other part of it is it's the downside of individualism. I think it's the downside of being so free that you only have to think about yourself.
So what I hear you saying there is like you're saying, so the culture is basically allowed for, okay, I treat Leroy Hill as Leroy Hill, not as the black guy or something like that. The culturally speaking, where it used to be, if I hired Leroy Hill, I was hiring a black.
You're hiring a black guy who was going to be
who represented all other black guys because I may not know other.
Sure.
So that's how it used to be, and so you were the representative.
You had to be a representative, so that when they came to hire someone, they would say, "Well, look at him; he's not bad. Maybe the next guy won't be so bad."
So that's changed.
That's changed.
So on the positive side, there's more people saying, "Well, I'm just hiring a guy or whatever," not necessarily seeing you as the way over
the representative of right.
But the downside is because we're so narcissistic as a culture, that goes across all racial lines.
Yeah.
People feel no obligation to anybody else.
That's exactly right.
So
that's not a black thing. That's not just black. That's just this time in which we live right now. That's not just with black people. That's with everybody. Even at the news conference today, we're talking about the reporters. Who gives them? They represent us, the reporters. They work for the New York Times. They're there because we've given them the right to be there to ask questions for us, not to get their own thing done. They're there to give us and report information for us.
That's what I was like when I watched that presser, and I watched all of it except for the last 5 minutes of it. I was listening to it while I was doing some work, but I know at one point when everything's all tense and going forth and people are yelling and stuff like that, I'm thinking, what good does any of that do? I guess it gets them
5
kudos,
minutes.
It gets them their TV time.
Pats on the back
in the
they get to go do interviews and talk about their experience.
But I'm here trying to figure out, what is the president's agenda? What does he want to do? What is his real, genuine takeaway? I don't need him to argue about his takeaway. Just ask him what it is. And then ask another question. And if he's not clear, ask another question.
Somebody else ask it.
So that
it's not
can make a decision about what I believe about what he's saying. I'm like, dude, that guy, one of the things I came away with today, for example, on this was when he was going in and somebody asked him about the racism stuff against Jews, the anti-Semitism in the United States. Of course, the underlying thing is it's your fault, so why you're doing this. That sort of came across, whatever. And so, what is your real solution? What's your solution to racism? As if, first of all, the question is flawed because the assumption is a political person can solve it. When it's a heart issue and sin issue, but that's another story.
It's a different story.
But still, what could he practically do? And what they're angling at. Can you say your rhetoric's responsible? Can you, can you change that?
But you know what he does?
But what was interesting in his answer?
Go ahead. No, this is good.
What's interesting about his answer is he turned to the economy and said, well, the economy is great, and I believe if the economy is great, all these things are problematic. Now, that told me something important about Donald Trump, something I disagree with fundamentally. He believes, and I think this is genuine, I think he genuinely believes that racism is about economic equality.
Economic viability. But that's what the Democrats are saying,
which is partly true with the Democrats. So he was a lifelong Democrat for many, many years. I mean, he supported Democrats. And so I think he has a Democrat view, a traditional Democrat, not a progressive Democrat, a more liberal Democrat. The traditional liberal, Democrat view that the economy, when you have economic inequality, that's what racism is.
Sure.
So he answered that question as a traditional liberal Democrat would have, in that what I've done against racism is I've made the economy good for everybody. Now that's a sort of conservative Republican solution to the problem of what Democrats say. Now their solution isn't economic. Theirs is tax the rich, give to the poor. His is a conservative.
If everybody has an opportunity and resources, then.
But his diagnosis of racism was the same.
Right.
And it also told me that he believes again that money will solve that issue because it's a money issue to begin with, is his perception. So there's some things I disagree with. I agree with, but it's good. I learned something about him.
That's a fair
because they asked him
assessment.
Questions.
That's a fair assessment. When he said that, I started thinking to myself, okay, he believes in creating opportunities for people to be successful is a solution to racism, right?
Yeah, because he defines racism, I think, in the traditional liberal way, economic inequality, power, oppression, that kind of stuff.
When he talked, because he says the same thing when asked about the Jews. He doesn't address the problem of anti-Semitism. He says, here's what the Jews want. And I've given them Jerusalem. I moved my embassy there.
Yeah.
Here's what they wanted because that's what they needed and that's what they wanted and that's what we gave them. And when you think about what he's saying on those issues, I think it's good in one sense. He doesn't think it's his job to solve those problems because he can't.
Yeah. I just don't think he sees that there's anything outside of that.
I mean, he doesn't think that he can.
In a traditional liberal sense, I think he's very myopic in that he sees race as a class distinction. He sees racism as, so therefore the white guy in power is by definition racist.
Right.
He has to give up power. So in his way of equalizing power, he has sort of a
not to give up power, but to make everybody
else
power, a little
money,
a little slice.
So they get
because money is power.
They gain power, because money is power. That's he's a very money driven guy. So ironically, it's like you say, he has that traditional liberal view of race being power and inequality, not hate or bigotry or whatever, like a Christian would, I think, define that. And he has an actual answer to that question.
He does.
It's just not the answer in the way that they want it to be answered. They want it to be take away power.
Right.
And then give power, which is a progressive solution.
But it's not the way that it was in the past.
But it's not the liberal solution historically was. So it's really interesting. He's a classic liberal in that sense.
What you're saying is exactly right, because as he was speaking to them, he was speaking gibberish.
Yeah.
But to people who are really listening to him, he's saying, I'm going to create opportunities for people to be successful.
Yeah, and there's nobody talking about that because all the time, look how he yelled at Acosta. Yeah. Oh, he's mean, and the tone and rhetoric. Yeah. And then they'll say, oh, he didn't answer the question. He did answer the question.
He answered it in a way that they weren't expecting.
But they don't like the answer because they don't understand the answer. Because the only answer they want is, I'm sorry I said mean things and it's my fault. That's all they're looking for is their own answer. They're not. The problem is the media's not helping us because they're not saying, here's the question, here's how he answered it. Nobody's writing a thought piece on that.
Right.
At least that I know of.
Yet, or at least hopefully somebody will.
Yeah, maybe they will. But nobody's writing a thought piece on that that's in that any paper is going to publish in even the letter to the editors, because they all want anger. And
can I say this too?
But how do we make good decisions when we can't even get a decent, unless you take the time to listen to every single minute and
pull apart. Oh. But here's what I'll say. Here's why I loved his message. Because I don't think the country is as racist as they say it is. I don't think it is. I'm not saying that there's no racism in the country. I don't think it's as racist as they say it is. I think in part of the problem is people are not Like my cousin. I was talking about my cousin.
But we'll go back to that. So when you say it's not as racist,
it's not as racist as they say it is.
Unless you define racism the way they define it.
Unless they define it the way they define it.
So you're disagreeing, though, based on the equivocation of terms, though. You're defining racism differently than I think the media does.
Right.
If we define it their way, it is racist because by definition...
Because
it has to be.
It has to be because it's a Marxist...
Because they redefined racism as a Marxist distinction, power inequality between groups, and therefore, by definition, the entire structures are racist. Every white person
watch this. Any instance of inequality, even if it's 2%,
is still racist.
It's still racist.
So by their definition, the country is as racist because they define racism as the very existence of inequality. So when you're saying it's not racist, you're not just disagreeing with that.
I'm disagreeing with their definition of
race. I'm just clarifying that.
No, that's actually good. That's actually good clarification. And here's why. Look. If anybody's out there, and I hope there's people out here listening to us, I really want you to think about this. There's 130 million white people in America. It's something around that number. There's only 36 million black people in America. Okay, so if we just take raw numbers, there's 44 million white people that live in poverty. If we just take raw numbers, 44 million white people live in poverty. There's only 36 million black people, and 15 million or something around this. Less like 15 million, 14 million live in poverty, so to speak. I don't even think that's the case. I think it's more like 7 million live in poverty. 44 million, but I'm going to just take the high number, to 14 million live in poverty. I don't think 50% of black people, I think it's something like 27% live in poverty. Why not deal with the 44 million over the 14 million? Because it's more of them, right? If you really want to just go... numbers, there's more of them that live in poverty than black people, but it's not a way to solve the problem, is it? Absolutely. You can't solve the problem. 44 million white people live below the poverty line. 27% of black people live below the poverty line. What they're arguing is that 27% of black people, and I think it's more like 7 to 9 million black people who live below the poverty line. We need to be more concerned with them than the
percentages have to be equal.
They have to be equal, and they can't be. There's just, because there's nothing that ever is equal in society. There just isn't. Yeah. There's not an equal a number of men than women. There's not an equal number of boys in families than girls. It's just not. Yeah. There's nothing equal. There's not an equal spread of ability or intelligence in nowhere in society.
It's the issues are equal outcome versus equal opportunity. Who are they arguing for? What are they arguing with? But
and all that Trump can do. And all anyone in that situation can do is make sure that people have an equal opportunity.
Yeah, he's trying to raise the level of the water, so to speak, so everyone's boat rises kind of idea.
And people disagree with that idea because what they really want, again, they disagree with it, I think, because of these power structures that we talk about. What they really want is an equalization of poverty across lines. They want, if only 17% of white people are in poverty, then 17%.
I think honestly, and this is sad. I honestly think that, like, if you said there's, I think, I don't know what the numbers will boil down to off the top of my head, but if somebody said, okay, if you put another 20 million white people in poverty and to equalize the number,
then we'll be happy.
Honestly, I think there's sadly a group of people would be happy with that.
Yeah,
they'd feel like that was justice.
Yeah,
they don't want to.
And that's part. And I think that's part of it. I think that's part of the issue. How can you go into Georgia? No matter who you are, how can you go into Georgia and today, in 2018, preach about lynching and all this other stuff that went on in the 1960s? How can you do that? That's not happening in Georgia today. There's not a person in Georgia today that was lynched. All the people that were lynched, they're dead. Unfortunately, they died. There's not a person today in Georgia that is lynched. There's not a person that's living in an era or time in Georgia where they're being lynched. But that's where they're preaching. And fortunately, black people rejected that message. Or at least the people of Georgia did.
Yeah, lots of crazy things.
It's just we just live in a time where people are using this issue of race for power and to equalize power, not to serve anyone but themselves.
Yeah,
and I think that's the most unfortunate part. I mean, that's the conversation my cousin and I had. My cousin was his goal was not that he got a job. And he's got a decent job right now. His goal is not that he's got a job or a decent job. Trump's not doing good because he's not making more money. I said to my cousin, do you have the skills to make more money? Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I love my cousin. I mean, just being real. But do you have the skills to make more money?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have the ability, the capability to go out and make more money?
Yeah.
Why is it his job in 1600 Pennsylvania to make sure your wages go up? What part do you have to play in that?
Yeah.
And that's what I think is missing in this conversation. The people, you got to go out and acquire the skills and garner the skills to make your family successful. It's not nobody else's job but yours.
And that's what's defined, and that's the sad part of what you're saying, or you're arguing therefore that what you just said is by definition racism.
Oh, of course they say it is.
Because you look at the
statements
from these, all these universities, and they say to even say the phrase, there's equal opportunity or anything like that, is that phrasing is considered racist. Yeah. See, that's we've lost the ability to have any kind of conversation about what are your ideology, what's your philosophy of politics, what's your ethic, so all that's gone because all it is anything you say disagree with is by definition racism, and therefore that makes you racist. Therefore, you should not be heard. It's really difficult.
Shelby Steele said it. He put it this way, and I think this is in 2000. Actually, this is probably 2001, 1999, between 1999 and 2001. I was watching Afterwards. And, it was actually a Saturday morning, and I was vacuuming, and he was being interviewed. And I, turned the vacuum off because I wanted to listen to what he had to say. I heard about him, didn't know anything about him. And he said, when they raise their hand to say Black Power, he said, it's not really power. What it really is saying is give me what I want or else. He said, if you think about what they're saying is, if you who have don't give to me, who don't have, meaning I'm dependent on you, I will cause trouble. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
He said, Black Power, La Raza, all these other white power movements are deficit positions. They're positions of weakness where the person's only ability to affect change or affect anything is to wreak havoc. And when they destroy things, they're not destroying Manhattan, downtown, Manhattan. They're not doing that. They're destroying their own neighborhoods. They're burning down the place where their grandma has to go and get medicine. Grocery and medicines. They're burning down the place where the guy who's got 4 kids down the street has a job. That's what they're burning down. Yeah. So they're not really hurting the people who they really want to hurt. They're hurting themselves. They're making it difficult for the police to come into the neighborhoods and really solve crimes. How can you live in Chicago, have all these people die or murdered every year and have one solved crime, one solved murder? It's insanity.
And then re-elect the same people that put you in that position every time.
And then be mad at me. Because I'm saying, no, this is insane. No, I disagree with you. No, this is what you're talking to me is stupid. And be mad at me for saying that. You're insane. I'm not going to agree with you. And I'm not going to shut up about it. I'm not going to.
I thought it was entertaining. My entertainment, the other part about politics, the commercials are hilarious. So California, the Lieutenant Governor, Gavin Newsom, was running for governor. And he's been in power here as a Democrat. Democrats have run California for what?
A million years.
Yeah, a million years. Probably.
Since Pete
Wilson,
probably about 20 years. Pete Wilson.
Yeah. I mean, you can't count Schwarzenegger. But anyway.
You can't count it. So maybe his first term.
But even if you count him as the governor, still in terms of the daily running, the cities, and the state government levels, it's Democrats for a long, long time. Yeah. Anyway, so Gavin Newsom, who's the lieutenant governor, been around the last governor for his entire, I think both terms, so like 8 years, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, he's been in some form of power. So he runs, and I see one of his commercials in between a show that actually I was interested in, and it's like, I'm Gavin Newsom. I'm for change that we need. They're like, well, I want to do this, and listen. This is change. Vote for me for change. I'm like, everything you just listed is the same stuff you've been doing for the past
20 years.
Whatever year.
Yeah.
It's the same thing Governor Brown's been doing. It just becomes this political slogan, a word that means nothing, but they know that they do polling. People like the idea of change. They know their life is miserable. If you tell them you're going to change it, they'll vote for you.
And the thing is, they're letting you fill in the meaning of change.
Yeah, it's grooming. What we talked about many episodes.
They're letting you fill in the meaning.
Same as sexual predators use grooming language to get young people to, oh, come, this is okay, and they use these grooming language to get people to eventually be silent about abuse and those sort of things. That's what politicians do. They use that grooming language to get people, you fill it in, and then by the time people realize, it's too late. It's too late. But that's what happens in these things. You see it in Newsom's thing. It's I'm changed, and we need to change. But you're the same guy running has been in there, so he's acknowledging that people are miserable, but he's saying,
"I'm going to give you more of the same."
But a change.
I'm going to give you. It's going to be a change. A person giving you more of the same.
Yeah.
That's it.
And so that's what happens in Chicago and all these other places.
It's insanity.
You get the same people running, or the same group of people running with the same ideas, the same problems. They're not going to solve anything because they know by keeping those problems, they keep themselves in power. They keep people under the thumb. But they run on a platform of, I care about you. Yeah. I'm going to bring change. Yeah. I'm going to bring you power. I'm going to give you hope and change. Yeah. Change and hope.
You keep the hope, I'll take the change.
Yeah, well, they want to let you keep the change.
Yeah. But what's very interesting is,
that's what I think.
It's so funny you brought this up. I was watching this guy, and this guy was talking about Gleichschaltung. And Gleichschaltung was the process by which the Nazis pacified the people, took over the economy, took over industry, politics, and every facet of human life. And it was called Gleichschaltung. And this guy said that he was watching all these old Nazi films, and he said to himself, "Why do they keep saying Heil Hitler to each other when Hitler is nowhere around?" He said, "Why do they keep saying Heil Hitler to each other when Hitler is nowhere around?" And then he said it dawned on him. When they stood up and said Heil Hitler to each other, they were saying, "I am not a threat to the way that that things work.
Yeah,
I'm a sycophant. I agree with the way things, and I am not a threat to the way things work. And every time I say Heil Hitler, I am reinforcing to you, and you're reinforcing to me that we are no threats to the way things are going."
You didn't want to get the word back that you were a threat to the whole system.
And that's what political correctness is in our own time. It is the process by which they are squeezing us to think the same about everything, so that no one will say anything about anything, because they don't want to lose their jobs, they don't want to be ostracized from their families and friends, and they don't want their lives to be difficult. So no one will say anything, and they'll just keep their heads down until all of a sudden we all look the same. Yeah. When I was
it's happening in Christian higher ed too.
Absolutely.
So this is not for people. I mean, listen, this is not an isolated. It's not just a political thing. It's not just these atheist, secular, and people want to put labels all those places. But the truth is, it's happening in the universities that are, have had historic Christian strengths, even some that have been historically conservative. I see tons of that stuff happening, and it's very problematic.
It's bad, because look, we talk about it all the time. I don't know how much time we have.
We got a few minutes left.
Yeah, we talk about it all the time about the relationship between the seminary and the church. In Europe, if you look back at Europe, and we're talking about in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, where the churches were still, and the seminaries were still close together, there was a divide that happened. The people in the churches would send their kids off to the seminaries, and they'd go and learn from these guys, Bolton and Barth, all these people, and they would come back to the churches, and they would look at these people like, well, you're an alien. We don't even understand what you're saying to us. So ultimately, the people in the churches stopped sending their kids to the seminaries because they were coming back with all this trash, and you had a divergence that happened. And the problem was that when these things diverged, cultural issues began to bubble up, and the church had no one thinking deeply about these issues that they could turn to for advice and thought, and who could help steer us in the right direction toward Christ, right?
Yeah. And
the seminaries lost the vitality of young people coming in to the churches to learn, and they were really stayed within themselves. And now you have this disjuncture between the seminary and the church in Europe, where they're not really talking to each other. I'm telling you, we're having the same disjuncture here. Here in California, I have what's called the holy man mythology at work in the church, where the pastor thinks that he knows everything. He doesn't. Much respect to the hard work that they do, but you don't know everything. You absolutely don't. And I'll guarantee you, if you think that you know everything, your church is absolutely sterile.
Yeah, and that problem manifests itself differently in the different traditions.
It does.
I mean, and if you look at the predominant evangelical tradition, the pastor's authority is the final thing. It's a little different than the historic pastor role in the black church, as the man of God kind of thing. There's a different foundation theologically, but it works in the end. Looks very much the same. To be what you're saying, in those traditions, you've got people that elevate this one person to be the final answer for everything. Well, but in the end, a lot of guys are trying to just keep the lights on and make a living, so they're not going to go against. Yeah, they're not going to say things that are politically incorrect or because they're going to offend somebody, and somebody might be a giver or a tither, and they're going to do it. So,
and the temptation is to keep things light, and not challenge people for fear that people will leave.
Yeah, well, because everyone gets offended at everything.
I think.
I heard a guy was telling me that he was teaching a sermon, and it was just on. I mean, it was not even on a political issue. It was just talking about sin and the conviction of the sin of the Holy Spirit. He wasn't like fire and brimstone talking about it. I mean, he was just talking about here's what the Holy Spirit. There might be things out there that you feel convicted of, kind of just a very general kind of thing. Right. And some gal came up to him after. She was just offended that he would talk about that, and that made her feel bad, and that was horrible. How bad she felt because of what he said about that. And it's like, well, if you feel bad, that's what we're talking about is conviction, but that made her feel bad, so therefore he was in the wrong. Because people just don't want to feel bad, even if it's from God, and conviction of the way they should be living.
I'm gonna tell you. I will tell you. That's as one of my pastors used to say. I'm your friend. He would say hard things. He'd say, "I'm your friend. I'm telling you this because you need to hear it, and I'm your friend." And and he would say hard things to people. Yeah. And I'm going to tell you, you cannot love people if you don't say hard things to them. Yeah. Jesus said, "You love me, but you don't obey my commands." How you say you love me, but you don't do what I tell you to do? How is that true? I mean, if you say you love Jesus and you really love you, and He said that to you, you don't think you're going to feel bad about that? You should feel bad, and if you don't feel bad, Yeah.
Well, that's maybe a good note to go off of and just say, look, I think there's a lot of hard things that need to be said to the church.
Yeah, I love the church.
And I think we're way too driven by politics and who we vote for and those sort of things, as opposed to the realities of who the Christ is. And I think the church, it's a challenge for those of us leading and educating and involved.
I think
to learn how to speak those truths.
I think you're 100% right, and I agree with you. I just want, even as a football coach, I would rather lose the right way than win the wrong way.
Yeah, that's how I grew up.
I would rather lose.
There's a good right win. Way than there's also a bad win. There's a good loss and there's a bad loss. Right. It's not all losses are bad. Right. Some losses are good. Right. So sometimes
it's addition by subtraction.
Yeah. You can, and then that is very antithetical to our culture of championship only. Yeah. Anything less than perfect season, undefeated, is no good. And we live our lives that way, unfortunately, and that's got to change, even as a church. So, all right, well, we'll be back next week, and hopefully Ward will be able to join us.
If you don't come back, man, whatever.
We might have to replace him with Corey.
We might have to replace you with Corey Marsh.